On my 70th birthday, my family invited me to dinner at the most expensive restaurant in Millbrook Heights. They ordered prime steaks, vintage champagne, and celebrated like money was no object. Then, while I was in the restroom, they vanished. Left me sitting alone with an $892 bill and a handwritten note that said, "Happy birthday, Mom, time you learned what generosity really means." I thought it was just a cruel joke from children who resented my careful spending habits. But what happened over the next 3 weeks would teach them a lesson about respect, family, and consequences they'd never forget. And that was only the beginning. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and I've lived in Millbrook Heights for 47 years. I moved here with my late husband Charles when our oldest daughter Rebecca was just 3 years old. Back then, Millbrook Heights was a modest working-class town where neighbors knew each other's names and children played in unlocked yards until the streetlights came on. Now it's become one of those places where people drive luxury cars to buy organic groceries and complain about property taxes while living in houses worth more than most people see in a lifetime. I still live in the same 2-story colonial Charles and I bought in 1977. White clapboard siding, green shutters, a front porch with a swing that creaks in the wind. The neighborhood has transformed around me, but my house remains exactly what it's always been. A home built on careful decisions and modest means. Charles passed away 4 years ago, 2 months after his 71st birthday. Pancreatic cancer, swift and merciless. In his final weeks he made me promise 2 things: take care of myself and don't let the children take advantage of my kindness. I kept the first promise religiously, maintaining my health with daily walks and regular doctor visits. The second promise proved more difficult to honor. Our 3 children had very different relationships with money, and by extension, very different relationships with me. Rebecca, now 47, worked as a marketing executive in downtown Millbrook Heights. She'd inherited her father's analytical mind, but somehow convinced herself that financial planning was beneath her. "Money is a tool, Mom," she'd say whenever I questioned her spending. Our middle child, James, was 44 and owned a small construction company. He understood the value of hard work, but had expensive tastes that often exceeded his income. He drove a truck that cost more than my first house, wore work boots that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and somehow always needed to borrow money for temporary cash flow issues. Then there was Sarah, my youngest at 39. Sarah had never met a cause she wouldn't fund or a charity she wouldn't support. Her heart was enormous, but her wallet was perpetually empty. She taught elementary school in the next town over, barely making enough to cover her own expenses, yet constantly organizing fundraisers and donating to every sob story that crossed her path. All 3 had married, giving me a collection of sons and daughters-in-law who ranged from pleasant to tolerable. Rebecca's husband Michael worked in finance and shared her casual attitude toward money. James had married Diane, a nurse who seemed to be the only financially responsible person among my children's spouses. Sarah's husband Kevin worked in IT and spent most of his free time building elaborate computer systems that served no purpose I could understand. The birthday dinner invitation came from Rebecca, delivered with the kind of enthusiasm that should have made me suspicious. She called on a Tuesday evening while I was washing dishes from my simple dinner of baked chicken and green beans. "Mom," she said, her voice bright with artificial excitement. "We want to take you somewhere special for your birthday this year. Somewhere really nice." I dried my hands slowly, already sensing trouble. "That's thoughtful, dear. But you know I don't need anything fancy. We could just have dinner here, like always." "Absolutely not," Rebecca said firmly. "You're turning 70, Mom. That's a milestone. We're taking you to Blackstone Manor." Blackstone Manor. I'd heard the name whispered around town with the kind of reverence usually reserved for churches or courtrooms. It was the kind of restaurant where they didn't list prices on the menu, because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. The kind of place where a single meal cost more than I typically spent on food in a month. "Rebecca, that's completely unnecessary," I said. "I'd be perfectly happy with dinner at Romano's, or even that little Italian place by the park." "Mom, please, let us do this for you. When's the last time you did something nice for yourself?" The question stung because the answer was obvious. I didn't do nice things for myself because nice things cost money, and money was something I'd learned to respect through 47 years of careful budgeting, economic uncertainty, and the persistent fear that someday there might not be enough. "I do nice things for myself all the time," I said defensively. "I bought new curtains for the living room last month." Rebecca laughed, but it wasn't a kind sound. "Curtains from the discount store don't count, Mom. I'm talking about actually living a little, actually enjoying the money you and Dad worked so hard to save." There it was, the money conversation, always lurking beneath the surface of every family interaction, the unspoken resentment about my financial habits. My children had never understood why I clipped coupons, why I shopped sales, why I maintained a savings account that could cover 6 months of expenses. They saw frugality where I saw security. They saw stinginess where I saw wisdom. "All right," I said finally, "because sometimes it's easier to agree than to explain yourself for the 1,000th time. Blackstone Manor it is." "Perfect." Rebecca's voice sparkled with what I now recognize was vindication rather than joy. "Saturday night, 7 o'clock. James and Sarah are coming too, with their spouses. It'll be a real family celebration." The days leading up to the dinner crawled by with unusual weight. I found myself standing in my closet, trying to decide what one wears to a restaurant where meals cost more than monthly utility bills. I settled on my navy blue dress, the one Charles had always said brought out my eyes. I paired it with the pearl necklace he'd given me for our 25th anniversary, and low heels that wouldn't embarrass me if I had to walk any distance. Saturday arrived grey and drizzling, typical October weather for Millbrook Heights. I spent the morning cleaning house, a habit I'd maintained since childhood. My mother always said you should never leave home with dirty dishes in the sink, because you never knew what might happen while you were away. At the time I thought she was being overly cautious. Now I understand she was teaching me about preparation, about leaving things in order so you could handle whatever came next. I arrived at Blackstone Manor precisely at 7 o'clock. The building sat on a hill overlooking the Millbrook River, all dark stone and mullioned windows, like something from an English countryside magazine. Luxury cars filled the circular driveway, BMWs, Mercedes, a few vehicles I couldn't identify, but knew cost more than my annual income. The valet, a young man in a crisp uniform, took my 15-year-old Honda Civic with the same professional courtesy he'd probably shown the Tesla that pulled up behind me. I appreciated that small kindness more than he could have known. Inside, Blackstone Manor was everything I'd feared it would be: elegant, intimidating, and expensively understated. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables set with more silverware than seemed practical. The walls were lined with oil paintings that looked like they belonged in museums. Even the air smelled expensive, carrying hints of rare flowers and old wood, and something indefinably refined. The hostess, a woman about Sarah's age wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly budget, led me through the dining room to a corner table where my family was already seated. They stood as I approached, all smiles and air kisses and compliments about my dress. Rebecca looked stunning in emerald green silk, her hair professionally styled, makeup flawless. Michael wore a suit that hung on him like it had been crafted specifically for his frame. James had traded his usual work clothes for a navy blazer and tie, while Diane wore a burgundy dress that was both elegant and practical. Sarah had chosen something flowing and artistic in deep purple, and Kevin looked uncomfortable but presentable in what was clearly his only good suit. "Mom, you look beautiful," Sarah said, squeezing my hands. "Doesn't she look beautiful, everyone?" A chorus of agreement filled the air around our table. I felt simultaneously overdressed and underdressed, like I was wearing a costume to play a role I didn't understand. "This place is incredible," James said, gesturing around the dining room. "Look at those paintings. Look at this table setting. This is how the other half lives." "The other half?" I asked, settling into my chair. Michael laughed. "The half that doesn't check their bank balance before ordering wine." The comment landed strangely, carrying an edge I couldn't quite identify. I glanced around the table, looking for clarification, but everyone was already studying their menus with intense concentration. The menus themselves were works of art, heavy paper bound in leather covers, descriptions written in elegant script, but there were no prices anywhere. I flipped through the pages twice, thinking I'd missed something, before leaning toward Rebecca. "There are no prices," I whispered. She looked up from her menu, eyebrows raised. "That's how places like this work, Mom. If you have to ask about price, you probably shouldn't be here." The waiter appeared at our table, like he'd materialized from thin air, middle-aged, perfectly groomed, with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from years of serving people who expect perfection. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Blackstone Manor. My name is Frederick, and I'll be taking care of you this evening." He spoke to the table collectively, but his eyes kept returning to me, perhaps recognizing that I was the guest of honor, perhaps sensing my discomfort in these surroundings. "We have some exceptional specials this evening," Frederick continued. "Our chef has prepared a Wagyu beef tenderloin with truffle reduction, fresh Atlantic salmon with caviar beurre blanc, and locally sourced lamb with rosemary-infused jus. May I start you with cocktails, or perhaps a selection from our wine cellar?" James immediately perked up. "What do you recommend for wine? Something special, since it's Mom's birthday?" Frederick smiled. "We have an excellent Chateau Margaux from 2010, or if you prefer something more celebratory, our Dom Perignon vintage champagne is extraordinary." I had no idea what those wines cost, but I knew enough about fancy restaurants to understand that extraordinary was code for extraordinarily expensive. I opened my mouth to suggest something more modest, but Rebecca spoke first. "The champagne sounds perfect," she said. "We're celebrating a milestone birthday." "An excellent choice," Frederick said, making notes on his pad. "Shall I bring a bottle to start?" "Make it two," Michael added. "This is a special occasion." 2 bottles of vintage champagne at a restaurant where they didn't put prices on the menu. I felt my chest tighten, but I forced myself to stay calm. My children were adults. They understood money, understood consequences. If they wanted to order expensive champagne, they must have a plan for paying for it. The champagne arrived in silver buckets, presented with ceremony that felt both impressive and absurd. Frederick opened the first bottle with practiced skill, the cork emerging with a soft pop that somehow seemed more refined than any champagne opening I'd witnessed before. He poured small tastes for Michael and James, who nodded approval like they'd been drinking $200 champagne their entire lives. To Mom, Rebecca said, raising her glass, 70 years of teaching us the value of hard work, careful planning, and she paused, her smile sharpening, the importance of knowing when to spend money on things that matter. Everyone raised their glasses. I lifted mine automatically, but something about Rebecca's toast felt wrong. The emphasis on spending money, the way she'd looked at me when she said it, like she was making a point I was supposed to understand but didn't. We drank, and the champagne was admittedly delicious, light, crisp, with bubbles that seemed to dance on my tongue. I could understand why people paid premium prices for such things. I could also understand why people went bankrupt pursuing them. Dinner proceeded with a kind of surreal normalcy. My family talked about work, about weekend plans, about the weather, but underneath the ordinary conversation, I sensed something orchestrated. The way they ordered without hesitation, choosing the most expensive items Frederick described, the way they kept refilling their champagne glasses, calling for the second bottle before the first was finished, the way they avoided looking at me directly when discussing their choices. James ordered the Wagyu beef, the most expensive item Frederick had mentioned. Diane selected the Atlantic salmon with caviar. Rebecca chose something called the chef's tasting menu, which involved 7 courses of whatever the kitchen deemed worthy. Michael ordered both the lamb and the lobster appetizer, claiming he couldn't decide between them. Sarah requested the market special, which Frederick described in terms so elaborate, I couldn't even guess what it might cost. Kevin, following his wife's lead, ordered the same thing. I selected the simplest item I could find, roasted chicken with seasonal vegetables. Frederick nodded politely, but I caught something in his expression that might have been surprise or pity. "Are you sure that's all you want, Mom?" Sarah asked. "It's your birthday. You should get something special." "The chicken is special," I said firmly. "I'm sure it's prepared beautifully here." But even as I spoke, I was doing mental calculations. 7 people, expensive meals, 2 bottles of premium champagne, the kind of restaurant where simple dishes probably cost $50. We were easily looking at a bill that would exceed $1,000. The appetizers arrived looking like small works of art. Michael's lobster came with microgreens and sauce drizzled in geometric patterns. James had ordered something involving foie gras and fig compote that looked like it belonged in a photography studio rather than on a plate. Even my simple salad was presented with precision that bordered on obsessive. Everything was delicious. I had to admit that the flavors were complex, sophisticated, unlike anything I could have prepared in my own kitchen. But with each bite, I felt the weight of the inevitable bill growing heavier. "This is incredible," Sarah said, photographing her appetizer with her phone. "I can't believe places like this exist right here in Millbrook Heights, right under our noses." James agreed. "Makes you wonder what else we've been missing." Nothing we can't afford to discover, Michael said, refilling his champagne glass. Life's too short to eat cheap food. That comment stung more than it should have. I'd spent 47 years cooking nutritious, satisfying meals on a reasonable budget. I'd fed my family well without ever setting foot in a place like Blackstone Manor. The implication that my careful approach to dining was somehow inadequate felt like criticism of everything I'd worked to build. The main courses arrived with even more ceremony. My roasted chicken, while undoubtedly prepared with skill, looked almost embarrassingly simple next to the elaborate presentations surrounding it. James's Wagyu beef was sliced thin and arranged like flower petals. Rebecca's tasting menu included items I couldn't identify, each more architecturally complex than the last. "Mom, you should try this," Rebecca said, offering me a forkful of something that looked like art. "It's duck breast with pomegranate molasses and micro herbs." I accepted the bite, chewed thoughtfully. It was excellent, complex, flavorful. It was also probably worth $20 for that single forkful. "Delicious," I said honestly. "Very sophisticated. See, this is what you've been missing by being so..." She paused, searching for the right word. "Conservative with dining out." Conservative. Another euphemism for cheap, for overly careful, for all the things my children found frustrating about my approach to money. The meal continued through multiple courses, each more elaborate than the last. Wine appeared and disappeared, glasses refilled by attentive servers who seemed to anticipate our needs before we recognized them ourselves. Conversation flowed along with the alcohol, growing louder and more animated as the evening progressed. I found myself enjoying the atmosphere despite my anxiety about the cost. It was pleasant to see my family relaxed and happy, to be the center of attention on my birthday, to feel included in something special. For a few hours, I allowed myself to imagine that this was how we could always be together, laughing, sharing stories, creating memories without the constant undercurrent of financial tension that usually characterized our gatherings. Dessert arrived as a finale worthy of the evening's production. Individual soufflés, chocolate sculptures, fruit arrangements that looked too beautiful to eat. James ordered an expensive cognac to accompany his dessert. Michael requested a rare Scotch whiskey that Frederick described as extraordinary. Even Sarah, usually the most budget-conscious of my children, selected a dessert wine that came with a detailed explanation of its provenance and preparation. I chose simple vanilla ice cream, which arrived garnished with gold leaf and accompanied by handmade cookies that probably cost more than my usual entire dessert budget. As we finished our final bites and sipped our final drinks, I felt a complex mix of gratitude and dread. Grateful for the experience, for my family's attention, for the undeniable pleasure of exceptional food and elegant surroundings. Dreadful about the moment when reality would intrude in the form of a bill that would require months of careful budgeting to absorb. "I should visit the ladies' room before we leave," I announced, pushing back from the table. The champagne and wine had taken their toll, and I needed a few minutes to collect myself before facing whatever financial reckoning awaited. "Good idea, Mom," Rebecca said. "Take your time." I made my way through the dining room, past tables of well-dressed diners enjoying their own expensive evenings. The ladies' room was as elegant as the rest of the restaurant, all marble surfaces and gold fixtures and hand towels that were probably worth more than my usual paper products. I took my time, as Rebecca had suggested, washed my hands carefully, checked my appearance in the ornate mirror, tried to prepare myself mentally for the shock of seeing our bill total. Whatever it cost, I would handle it gracefully. I would pay without complaint, thank my children for their thoughtfulness, and worry about the financial implications later, in the privacy of my own home. When I returned to our table, something felt different immediately. The energy had changed, become charged with an emotion I couldn't identify. My family was standing gathering coats and purses, making the universal motions of people preparing to leave. "There you are, Mom," James said, but he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Ready to head out. I looked around the table, now cleared of dishes but still set with the leather folder that contained our bill. Frederick stood nearby, watching with the practiced neutrality of someone who'd witnessed every possible dining room drama. "Shouldn't we?" I began, gesturing toward the folder. "Already handled," Michael said quickly. "All taken care of." But something in his tone was wrong, something in the way everyone avoided looking directly at me, the way they moved toward the exit with unusual urgency. "How much was it?" I asked, because I needed to know, needed to understand what this evening had cost so I could plan my budget accordingly. "Don't worry about it, Mom," Sarah said, kissing my cheek. This was our treat. But she was already moving away, following the others toward the restaurant's entrance. I stood there for a moment, confused by their sudden exodus, by the way they seemed to be fleeing rather than leaving. "Excuse me," I said to Frederick, who was still standing by our table. "The bill." He looked uncomfortable, glancing toward the exit where my family had disappeared. "Ma'am, the bill hasn't been settled. The folder is still here." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Frederick picked up the leather folder, opened it discreetly. "The total is $892.47. Your family members indicated that you would be handling the payment. $892, nearly $900 for one meal. More than my monthly grocery budget for an entire year, more than I'd ever spent on anything except my house and car." I stared at the number, trying to process what had happened. My family hadn't handled the bill, they'd abandoned it, abandoned me, left me sitting in an expensive restaurant with a debt I couldn't possibly have anticipated or prepared for. "Ma'am," Frederick's voice was gentle but concerned. "Is there a problem?" I looked toward the entrance, hoping to see my family returning, hoping this was some kind of misunderstanding. But the elegant foyer was empty, except for the hostess and a couple waiting to be seated. That's when I noticed the small folded paper tucked under my water glass. My name was written on the outside in Sarah's careful teacher's handwriting. With trembling fingers I opened the note and read the message inside. "Happy birthday, Mom. Time you learned what generosity really means. Maybe now you'll understand why we think you should share more of the money you're hoarding instead of pinching every penny until it screams. Consider this an early lesson in what it feels like to be financially surprised. We know you have the money to cover this, so stop acting like you don't. Love your children who are tired of watching you count coins while sitting on a small fortune. P.S. Mine was Dom Perignon, 2008. Look it up." I read the note twice, then a third time, each reading making the betrayal more real and more devastating. This hadn't been a birthday celebration, it had been an ambush, a coordinated attack designed to force me into exactly this situation, sitting alone in an expensive restaurant responsible for a bill I couldn't afford, humiliated and abandoned by the people who were supposed to love me most. The dining room around me seemed to grow quieter, more watchful. Other diners were beginning to notice my distress, The way I sat alone at a table clearly set for 7, holding a note with shaking hands. Frederick cleared his throat gently. "Ma'am, how would you like to handle the payment this evening?" I looked up at him, this professional man who'd served my family with courtesy and skill, who now found himself in the awkward position of collecting an enormous bill from a 70-year-old woman who'd been abandoned by her children. I began, then stopped. What could I say? That I didn't have $900 in my checking account, that my credit cards were already stretched thin from years of careful but necessary expenses, that my savings account, the one my children thought represented hoarded wealth, was actually my carefully maintained emergency fund, the financial security blanket that let me sleep at night. "I need to make a phone call," I said finally. "Is there somewhere private I could step aside?" Frederick nodded toward a small alcove near the bar. "Of course, take all the time you need." But as I stood up from the table, note still clutched in my hand, I realized I didn't know who to call. My children had orchestrated this situation deliberately. My friends were all in similar financial circumstances, living on fixed incomes and careful budgets. Charles was gone, and with him the partnership that had helped me navigate difficult decisions for 47 years. For the first time since his funeral, I felt truly completely alone, and that's when I realized something important. My children thought they were teaching me a lesson about money, about generosity, about the value of spending on experiences. What they'd actually taught me was something far more valuable: the difference between people who use money as a tool and people who use it as a weapon. They just used my 70th birthday to declare war on me. What they didn't understand was that a woman who'd survived 47 years of careful financial planning, who'd raised 3 children and maintained a household through economic uncertainty and personal loss, was not someone to underestimate. If they wanted to play games with money, I was about to show them what a real game looked like. I walked to the alcove Frederick had indicated and pulled out my cell phone, but instead of calling for help with the bill, I dialed a number I'd memorized years ago but hoped never to use. "Cromwell, Ashford and Associates," a professional voice answered despite the late hour. "Attorney answering service." "This is Eleanor Whitmore," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need to speak with Harrison Cromwell immediately. Tell him it's about revising my will, and it can't wait until Monday." As I waited for the call to connect, I looked back at the table where my family had sat just minutes ago, where they'd laughed and celebrated and planned my financial humiliation. The leather folder containing the $892 bill still sat there, waiting for resolution. My children thought they'd cornered me. What they didn't realize was that they just freed me from the last traces of guilt about the decision I'd been considering for months. By tomorrow morning, their lesson in generosity was going to become my lesson in consequences, and that was only the beginning. Harrison Cromwell arrived at Blackstone Manor 45 minutes after my call, carrying his leather briefcase and wearing the expression of a man who'd handled family crises at all hours for 30 years. He found me sitting in the restaurant's elegant lobby, the $892 bill paid with my emergency credit card, nursing a cup of tea that Frederick had kindly provided while I waited. "Eleanor," Harrison said, settling into the chair across from me. "Tell me what happened." I handed him the note my children had left, watched his eyebrows rise as he read it. "They planned this," I said simply. "Every detail." The expensive restaurant, the champagne, the elaborate meal. They wanted to teach me a lesson about being generous with money. Harrison folded the note carefully, slipped it into his briefcase. And what lesson would you like to teach them? That question hung in the air between us like smoke. I thought about Rebecca's smug toast, about James ordering the most expensive items without hesitation, about Sarah's comment that I should share more of the money I'm hoarding. I thought about sitting alone at that table, abandoned and humiliated, while other diners whispered about the old woman whose family had run out on the bill. I want them to understand consequences, I said finally. Real consequences. Harrison nodded slowly. He'd been Charles's lawyer before becoming mine, had helped us draft our original wills 25 years ago. He knew my family, knew their financial situations, knew exactly what my estate represented. Your current will divides everything equally among the 3 children, he said. Approximately $1.2 million total, after the house, investments and life insurance. That's $400,000 each. I stared at him. I want to change that. Tonight, Eleanor, you're upset. Maybe we should, Harrison. I leaned forward, meeting his eyes. I'm not making this decision in anger. I'm making it in clarity. For the first time in years, I see my children exactly as they are. They don't respect me. They don't respect the money Charles and I worked 47 years to save. They see me as a selfish old woman hoarding wealth that rightfully belongs to them. Harrison opened his briefcase, removed a legal pad. What did you have in mind? I'd been thinking about this during the 45 minutes I'd waited, letting the plan crystallize as my shock faded into cold determination. I want to establish a trust. The money goes to charity, unless specific conditions are met. What kind of conditions? Each child has to write me a letter, a real letter, handwritten, explaining why they think they deserve their inheritance. They have to acknowledge what they did tonight, apologize sincerely, and demonstrate they understand the value of money and respect. If their letters meet my standards, they get their inheritance. If not, I shrugged. The money goes to causes that actually help people. Harrison scribbled notes. Any other conditions? They have 30 days, and they can't know about each other's letters. This isn't a group project. Each child has to find their own way to show me they're worthy of what Charles and I built. And if all 3 fail, I thought about the Dom Perignon champagne they'd ordered, without hesitation, the Wagyu beef, the casual way they'd discussed expensive purchases. Then the local food bank gets a very generous donation, along with the literacy program at the library, the senior center, and the scholarship fund at Millbrook Community College. Harrison finished writing, looked up at me. Eleanor, this is a significant decision. Your children will be devastated if they lose their inheritances. They should have thought about that before they decided to humiliate me on my birthday. We spent the next hour drafting the documents. Harrison's legal language transformed my emotions into binding clauses, my hurt into ironclad conditions. The new will would take effect immediately, superseding all previous versions. My children would receive copies of the letter requirements within a week, along with notification that their inheritances were now conditional. By 11 o'clock, everything was signed, witnessed, and notarized using Blackstone Manor's late-night notary service. Apparently wealthy people needed legal documents executed at all hours. I drove home through empty streets, my Honda Civic purring quietly through the darkness. The house felt different when I walked in, not empty the way it had since Charles died, but purposeful. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, sat at the kitchen table, where Charles and I had planned our budget every Sunday for 47 years, and tried to imagine his reaction to the evening's events. He would have been furious about the restaurant ambush. Charles had strong opinions about respect, about family loyalty, about people who used emotional manipulation to get what they wanted. But he also would have worried about my decision to conditionally disinherit our children. "They're spoiled," I said aloud to the empty kitchen. "We gave them too much, made their lives too easy. They don't understand consequences, because we never let them face any." My phone buzzed with a text message from Rebecca. "Hope you had a wonderful birthday dinner, Mom. Thanks for being such a good sport about everything. XOXO, a good sport." As if abandoning me with a $892 bill was some kind of harmless prank that required good sportsmanship to appreciate. I turned off my phone without responding. The letters from Harrison's office arrived the following Thursday, delivered by courier to each of my children at their workplaces. I knew this because Rebecca called me within 2 hours, her voice shrill with panic. "Mom, what is this? What do you mean our inheritances are conditional? You can't be serious about this." "I'm completely serious," I said calmly. "You wanted to teach me a lesson about money. Consider this my lesson to you about respect." "But Mom, we were just trying to help you learn to enjoy life. The restaurant thing was supposed to be fun, to show you what you've been missing." "Fun?" I kept my voice level. "Rebecca, you abandoned me in an expensive restaurant with a bill I couldn't afford. You humiliated me in front of strangers. You used my birthday as an excuse to punish me for being careful with money." Exactly which part was supposed to be fun? Silence on the other end. "Then we knew you could afford it, Mom. You have plenty of money saved. That's not the point. The point is you made a unilateral decision about my finances without my consent. You treated me like a child who needed to be taught a lesson." "We'll pay you back," Rebecca said quickly. "We'll split the bill 3 ways. $800 divided by 3 years. We'll each give you $300. The bill was $892.47, I corrected. "And this isn't about the money anymore. It's about the principle." James called an hour later, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Mom, this is ridiculous. You're going to disinherit us over one dinner, over a stupid joke that got out of hand." "Read the letter carefully, James. You're not disinherited. You have an opportunity to earn your inheritance by demonstrating that you understand respect and responsibility." "This is manipulation," he said. "You're using money to control us, just like Dad always said you would." That comment hit like a physical blow. "Your father never said any such thing. He said you were paranoid about money, that you'd probably die clutching your bank statements. He said we'd have to fight you for every penny when you got old." I hung up on him. Sarah's call came that evening, her voice thick with tears. "Mom, please. I can't lose my inheritance. Kevin and I are already struggling with his student loans and the mortgage. We were counting on that money for our future." "Then you should have thought about that before you participated in humiliating me." "But I didn't want to. Rebecca planned the whole thing. She said it would be good for you, that you needed to learn to spend money on yourself. I just went along because I didn't want to cause family drama." I closed my eyes. Sarah, always the follower, always avoiding conflict by enabling the worst behavior of others. "Sarah, you're 39 years old. You can't blame your sister for your choices anymore. What do I have to write in this letter? What do you want me to say?" "I want you to tell me the truth about what happened, about why you thought it was acceptable, about whether you actually respect me as a person, or just see me as a source of future income. The line went quiet. I do respect you, Mom, then prove it. Over the next 3 weeks my children tried various strategies to change my mind. Rebecca sent flowers with cards that said, "I'm sorry you misunderstood our intentions." James showed up at my house with a check for $297.49, claiming it was his share of the restaurant bill plus interest. Sarah called every few days, crying and begging me to reconsider. None of them wrote a letter. On day 28, 2 days before the deadline, my mailbox finally contained something other than bills and advertisements. 3 envelopes, different handwriting, different approaches. Rebecca's letter was typed, formal, and completely missing the point. "Dear Mother, I apologize if our birthday celebration caused you distress. Our intention was to introduce you to fine dining and help you experience the joy of spending money on quality experiences. Perhaps we could have communicated our plan more clearly. I hope you will reconsider this harsh punishment for what was intended as a generous gift." James's letter was angry, defensive. "Mom, I'm sorry the restaurant thing upset you, but I think you're overreacting. We've always been a family that teases each other, and you taught us that money problems can be solved with hard work and planning. I worked hard to pay you back for dinner, and I think that should count for something. This whole inheritance test feels like you're trying to control us from beyond the grave." Sarah's letter was different. Handwritten on simple notebook paper, it rambled for 3 pages about her childhood, about feeling caught between her siblings' strong personalities, about her fear of conflict and tendency to go along with plans that made her uncomfortable. But buried in the emotional wandering was something real. "I knew what we were doing was wrong, Mom. I knew it would hurt you, but I was afraid Rebecca would be mad at me if I didn't participate, and I've spent my whole life trying to keep everyone happy. That's my fault, not yours. You deserved better from all of us, but especially from me, because I knew better, and did it anyway." I read all 3 letters twice, sitting at Charles's old desk in the corner of our bedroom. Then I called Harrison. "Only Sarah gets her inheritance," I told him. "She's the only one who understood the assignment. And the other 2, Rebecca's inheritance goes to the financial literacy program at the community college. James's goes to the food bank. They'll both receive letters explaining exactly why they failed." Harrison was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor, are you certain? This decision will affect your family relationships permanently." I looked out the window at the garden Charles and I had planted together, at the roses we'd tended for 20 years. "Harrison, some relationships can't survive the truth. Better to know that now than to spend whatever years I have left pretending otherwise." 6 months later, Sarah and I have dinner together every Sunday. She brings Kevin sometimes, and we talk about books, about her students, about the small things that make life meaningful. She's enrolled in a financial planning class and has started budgeting more carefully. She never mentions her siblings. Rebecca hasn't spoken to me since receiving Harrison's letter, explaining her disinheritance. James left an angry voicemail calling me a bitter old woman and promising I'd die alone. I deleted it without saving it. The local food bank sent me a lovely thank you note for the $400,000 donation made in James's name. They're expanding their programs to serve 3 additional counties. The community college's financial literacy program funded by Rebecca's inheritance, has already helped 60 families develop better money management skills. I sleep well at night now, no longer wondering what my children really think of me or whether they visit out of love or obligation. Some lessons are expensive, but the most important ones always are. My family thought they could teach me about generosity by abandoning me with their bill. Instead, they taught me the difference between people who deserve respect and people who simply demand it. And sometimes the most generous thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their choices. After all, that's what real love looks like.